So while Dunkirk is under construction, I guess I need to answer the question: is Dunkirk a battlecruiser or is it a battleship? In the French Navy, it was always called a battleship. Full stop.
Cuirassé Dunkerque.
So
Yes.
by design, during the design stages, they would say it was a battlecruiser sometimes. So croiseur de
Croiseur de bataille. I was close enough.
and
Which essentially means cruiser of battle. So it just inverted.
yeah, and so but whenever it enters service, it's a battleship. Full stop. That's what the French Navy called it. French Parliament would call them everything. To be honest, like they would call them anything from a cruiser to a battlecruiser to a battleship to capital ship to whatever they would think of on the Friday. But according to the French Navy, these are just basically a small battleship.
Just
And
a small
so-
anecdote. We know that
Sorry, go ahead.
No, we know that the Strasbourg and Dunkirk were built as an answer to the Deutschland class, the Class B.
Yeah.
What was the reaction of the royalty in the UK when they learned that when they saw the initial design of Dunkirk?
Probably the first one was flattery because it looks very superficially like a Nelson, but rip, and but the initial reaction is that like these are good ships more or less, like it's a solid design. However, there was no real like need for worry in the UK because Hood is going to blow it out of the water. Like the renown and repulsor match for it, they were covered. Britain was covered. Italy was more concerned because Italy still has old 12-inch pre-dreadnoughts. They didn't have anything beyond a 305 millimeter gun at this time. And Dunkirk would outrange any of the Italian battleships, and so it was essentially a hard counter to the Deutschland class, and it could deal with any of its Italian counterparts, and that was the main concerns for the French Navy. For the French Navy. When the Dunkirks are announced, they eventually get countered more or less by the Scharnhorst class, as well as the Italians respond basically right as Strasbourg is getting set up to start getting. So there's Dunkirk and Strasbourg are the two ships of the class. So when Strasbourg is getting started, the Italians respond by announcing the Littorio class. So this is going to be Vittorio Veneto and Littorio, later on Roma. And so...
Oh, we're already there on that development, I see.
And so Strasbourg gets beefed up. It gets the armor belt is angled even further on Strasbourg. It is thicker. They increase the thickness of the bulkhead armor pieces as well as on the turrets. Strasbourg also has a slightly different bridge arrangement where it has a Admiralty bridge as well as a Captain's bridge. And so the advantage of having only front-facing turrets for these ships is that it means that they save weight. You can make your citadel, so the citadel is the space that is most heavily protected in a ship and weighs the most. And so you can, if you put your turrets only in the front, your citadel space only has to cover those turrets and your engines. And so you can make your citadel space shorter and therefore lighter. And that is the design philosophy. The quadruple gun allows you to have even less turrets, which saves weight. And so that's the idea behind it. And so the Dunkirk also introduces a bunch of different advances. It has the perfected omni-purpose shell. It does not actually have, as far as we're aware, it never actually carried a high explosive shell. There seems to have been one developed for the gun, but it's not in any of the records for the ship. And so the and the shell seems to be tailored for killing cruisers. It's a very heavy explosive charge in the shell compared to other types of shells. So most battleship AP shells, 2% of the weight is explosive. In the Dunkirks, it's 3.5%, which doesn't seem like much, but you're almost doubling the explosive weight of your AP shell compared to what it should be.
Talking about shells being tailored to deal against cruisers, that would be a good example, I think.
Yeah, and like for context, a Dunkirk shell is a 13-inch shell, right? It has more explosive and more explosive power than Iowa's 16-inch shells do.
Excuse me?
Yes, the explosive power of a Dunkirk armor-piercing shell is greater than that of an Iowa armor-piercing shell.
Question: did the Dunkirk still boasted the variable fuse? You mentioned it.
Yes.
Or not? Oh, okay, so it did. All right.
Yeah.
And I cannot overmatch a Devonshire, so I need to wait until she's broadside. About no, it's fine.
Yeah. So the advantage of such a thing is that it will do significantly more damage after it penetrates something, but it's a little bit less likely to penetrate something. That's the cost.
I'm about to get ruined by this synop.
And so Dunkirk also beat. So basically, these 330 millimeter shells are like exceptionally strong for their size. They're very good guns. The problem is with the turrets, the guns are mounted very close together, and so they did have a bit of blast interference. And so they would have kind of crazy dispersion sometimes, which is why it has it in game. And so that was some of the trade-offs. Those shells were very, very good, but they did have a downside. The ship is not designed for slugging it out with a modern battleship. It's designed to slug out with modern cruisers.
Cruisers, yes.
So,
as you can see with the armor scheme in game,
Yeah.
it is vulnerable to every kind of battleship AP,
So-
which is why I'm hiding from this synop right now.
yeah.
Because I know I'm gonna get absolutely wrecked if I'm not careful. Regarding the historical armor of the Dunkirk, was these ships well protected for their time, or were they?
So against cruisers, yes, they're like against their design targets. These ships are fine. Against real battleship caliber guns, no.
Not really. Okay.
So Strasbourg, kind of, you can argue, but the belt of Dunkirk is only 225 millimeters thick, which is 9 inches, roughly, which is not very much. It is angled, which is good. Any angle on a belt will help you, but it's not enough to resist a heavy shell. The armor quality is pretty good too, but it's not. But again, it's not enough to compensate for how thin it is, relatively speaking. The Dunkirk class also comes in with a brand new revolutionary torpedo defense system that nobody else uses. On the surface, it looks very similar to a United States setup, where you have essentially what you have is a series of bulkheads. There are 2 Dunkirks. There are 2 in the Dunkirk class.
Yeah,
But
there
you
was 2 Django. There was Dunkirk and Strasbourg. There was 2 Dunkirks.
And so you have an outer wall, and you would have a mixture of spaces that are empty spaces and liquid-filled spaces. And then you would have an inner wall that's a bulkhead. It's a heavy, flexible bulkhead that is designed to basically to absorb the impact but not break into the side of the ship. And that's the idea. So essentially, you know that you can't stop the power of a torpedo explosion, so you have to absorb it over time and space. Dunkirk's is basically very similar to that of, say, an Iowa's, except it's deeper than Iowa's is. So it's actually, in theory, more protected than Iowa is against a torpedo, in reality. It also uses a very interesting thing called ebonite
Ebonite.
Ebonites.
Ebonite. Mousse ebonite.
Yeah.
Ebonite foam, essentially. That's how you would call it.
It's basically they're rubber blocks, like bricks, basically. That's basically rubber that is hydrophobic, and so it expels water. And so some of the void spaces in Dunkirk and in Richelieu are filled with these little blocks, and so they basically keep water out. Problem is that it also keeps water onto the walls on the inside, so you do get some rust problems if you have them longer than 20 years, which is what happens on Richelieu and Jean Bart later. But the advantage is that you have even more protection against torpedoes and flooding. And so it's a very interesting concept that nobody else does. There is also another downside with it, is that if you get hit by a torpedo, it's very likely that you're also going to have oil in the water. And the rubber absorbs that oil and then becomes flammable. And so with flammable material inside of your ship is not very good, especially whenever you're having to then repair that damage with blowtorches. And so Dunkirk does catch on fire a few times due to this at some points. But overall, I would say it's better for combat, not so good for maintenance. And they were also the first battleships to use unit propulsion machinery, which means that they would have their boiler rooms connected to the engine rooms that were necessary, and they would have they had two sets. So they had boiler room, engine room, and so which is a different layout of machinery than older battleships, which allows them to be a little bit more compact as well as more subdivided. It's the first battleship to use this, not the first ship to use this. But another design flaw in this ship, though, was that the bow design is very thin. And so in heavy weather, these ships did not...
Don't let me interrupt.
Robin, you can't do that.
I'm here for the gameplay, as promised.
And so the bow on the Dunkirks were very thin and prone to damage. And in heavy weather, basically, it was basically submerging. It would cut into the water and basically fall in. It wasn't buoyant enough. This is the same problem that the Iowas had, although I don't think the Iowas had it as badly as the Dunkirks did. And so it did have some problem.
Okay, so Dunkirk, first ship to actually use literal rubber foam as self-sealing torpedo protection. There was none of that design were ever used in previous ships.
In previous battleships, for sure. I don't know about cruisers, but and that was but it was the first battleship to make use of it. And other than the Richelieu class later, it was the only battleships to use it.
We'll get to it eventually. Okay, that was a decent game. I'm actually glad I had it on stream. Let's just make a pause on the historical part here. It was a fun game. Congrats to my teammates, because that Dallas actually carried me as well. Good job. I was scared of the scene up a little bit, but good display of Dunkirk while Mr. Princeblip here was just getting all the historical aspect in it.
Yeah,
well done.
and we will get on to the Mers El Kavir events